All right, so good evening, and we're going to start our last part of your lecture before we actually do the exam, okay? So what we need to do is just appendicular skeleton, okay? And we're going to do that lecture first, and then after that, we're going to do some lab, and that should finish the day. And since our exam is going to be tomorrow, okay, try to answer the lab exercises, especially the pre-test, because remember, most of the questions are coming out from the pretest. So make sure that you look at it, okay, and try to actually see if the questions are something that you can understand, and go through the pretest will help you out a lot, okay. All right, so I'm going to start with the appendicular skeleton in chapter 8, and that is going to be the slide that we're going to go through, okay. So remember, the appendicular skeleton is just going to be the upper extremities and the lower extremity. Okay, then I want to be sure that's the one that you had. Okay, so I'm going to open my pen, and I should be able to write on it. Right, so you see the writing, and we're going to start with the appendicular skeleton. Okay, so the appendicular skeleton has two girdles. For the upper limbs, we have the pectoral girdle, and for the lower limbs, we have the pelvic girdle. And each of the girdles has an attached limb. And just take a look at the different structures of the different parts of the appendicular skeleton. The architecture of the upper limb and the lower limb, they're quite similar. So there's just minor modification, and names are actually just a little bit changed, but their architecture is going to be quite similar with both sides of the limbs, okay, the upper and the lower. So the first thing is we're going to go and take a look at the girdle called the pectoral girdle. So it's actually made out of your clavicle, okay, and the scapula. So the scapula joins with the clavicle, and the clavicle joins with the sternum, okay? But the scapula is free floating. So the end of the clavicle join the scapula do not join each other, or the axial skeleton, okay? So that's actually a free floating bone. You can actually move your scapula front and back. So you can actually see, you can move front and back. All right, so the first, we're gonna look at the girdle, and this is what the pectoral girdle is. Now you got the clavicle. The clavicle is connected to the scapula. It articulates with up to the sternum, and then at the lateral end, it actually articulates with the scapula. Okay, so we're gonna take a look at first the clavicle. Well, how does the clavicle look like? So whenever you look at anatomy of the bone, you should be able to see and distinguish anterior, posterior, medial, and lateral, okay? So, and then be able to see also if you're looking at the superior view or the inferior view. So the first thing is the best way to look at the clavicle, who's the medial and the lateral side, the flat end, all of this clavicle is on the medial side. That means it goes to the sternum. So that's called the sternal end. So that's going to be medial. And the part that looks like a duck beak of the clavicle, we're going to call it the acromial end, and that's going to be the lateral side, okay? So now you're able to actually take a look at who's medial and who's lateral. So that always, when you study anatomy, put yourself on medial, lateral, posterior, anterior, superior, and inferior, so that you can actually understand the markings on the bone, okay? So I know what is my medial side, I know it's my lateral side, okay? Then I should be able to distinguish superior and inferior. So on the superior, this is flat, okay? There's nothing here on the superior onto the lateral side. But the one on the inferior, okay, on the lateral side, okay, it has this bump. The bump is called the cunoid tubercle, the cunoid tubercle, okay? So we got a lot of letter C's on the marking. We got coracoid, cunoid. You know, you must be able to distinguish them, okay? So this is going to be the cunoid tubercle. That's actually the inferior part of that clavicle. So now I know my inferior. If I see that bump, cunoid tubercle, my superior does not have that bump, right? So now I'm able now to actually distinguish the different parts of my clavicle, okay? So after looking at the clavicle, so my cunoid tubercle, acromial end, sternal end, okay, that actually tells me what the clavicle looks like. And I'm gonna take a look now at my scapula, okay? So my scapula, I need to know medial, lateral, superior, inferior, anterior, and posterior, okay? So the major part here is gonna be this glenoid cavity. This is called the glenoid cavity. That glenoid cavity is where the head of the humerus would articulate. So the head of the humerus would articulate. So if I see the glenoid cavity, that means this is lateral, okay? And then the other side of the glenoid cavity is a straight part of that border of that clavicle, the scapula. It is the medial border of the scapula. So it's actually straight. It runs parallel to the vertebrae. So that's how I determine my medial border, okay? So if I know my lateral, I know my medial. So this is gonna be the lateral border of the scapula. This is the medial border of the scapula, okay? And then I should be able to know who's my superior and inferior, okay? So the superior part of the scapula has this notch. And since it is above the scapula, I'm gonna call that suprascapular notch. Again, as I said, the anatomy is actually the name or the definition or the description of a certain structure. This is above the scapula, so I'm gonna call that suprascapular notch. So if I know this is above superior, so this is my inferior part, okay? So I got angles, inferior angle, superior angle, and then this is supposed to be my lateral angle right here. Okay, so I now was able to actually identify medial, lateral, superior, and inferior. Now the next is going to be the anterior and the posterior. Okay, so if you take a look at the anterior side, they're flat. It's actually like a fossa, a depression there. So there's nothing in between that part of the scapula. So this is going to be my anterior. I'm going to show you the posterior. On the posterior, okay, it has a spine. Okay, so that's the reason why I know if I see the scapular spine, that means I'm looking at the posterior part of the scapula. Okay, so I see my spine, that's your posterior part of the scapula. So now I'm able to know medial, lateral, superior, inferior, and then anterior and posterior. Okay, so I'm identifying that anterior part first. Okay, so the anterior part, I had an orientation on all the borders, angles, notch, and the glenoid cavity in this picture. Now there's two processes. When you say process, it's just an elevated marking. One in the front, this is called the coracoid process, okay? The coracoid process. Remember, the name of the coracoid process actually also exists at the mandible. Remember the sharp part at the mandible called the coracoid process. It also named here the coracoid process. So don't get confused. So this should be the coracoid process of the scapula. So the bump that you see in the front, that's your coracoid process. And the bump that you see into the back, that's your acromion process, okay? Acromion process. So this is going to be the glenoid cavity. This is the suprascapular notch, superior border, lateral border, medial border, superior angle, inferior angle, and this should be your lateral angle here, okay? And this depression that you see here, that's flat, you can call it subglenoid meaning under scapular fossa. Since this is located at the anterior part, so you notice it's going to be below the scapula. That's the reason why we call it subscapular fossa. It's a depression, okay? So I'm going back to the posterior. I got my spine, okay? So I see this bump onto the front, okay? That is going to be called the coracoid process. I see the end of the spine ends as a bump. That is called the acromion process, okay? So if I actually want to associate this with something similar, the coracoid process looks like a bird's beak, okay? But on the acromion process, it's flat. It looks like a duck's beak, okay? That's another way to actually look at it. So at the end of the scapular spine is your acromion process. The coracoid process exists in the front. And on the lateral side, again, I can see the glenoid cavity, which is the lateral angle, okay? And I have my lateral border, again, medial border, superior angle, inferior angle. Same position as the front. Now, the fossa that is located here, which is above the spine, I'm going to call it supraspinous fossa, meaning the fossa above the spine. So again, the name in anatomy is just the description of the location, okay? We don't make up names in anatomy. It just describes you where it is. It is above the spine, so I'm going to call it supraspinous fossa. And then the one at the bottom is called below the spine, so I'm going to name it infraspinous fossa. The good thing about anatomy is sometimes the muscle that is located in that area carries the name of the structure in the bone. So if this is a supraspinous fossa, the muscle on top of that is going to be called the supraspinatus muscle. And then the muscle below that located the infraspinous fossa, the muscle is called infraspinatus muscle. Okay, so we're not making words up. We're not making an anatomical structure. It's actually location. Okay, so I've already identified the supraspinous fossa, infraspinous fossa, and the subscapular fossa. Later on, it's going to be covered by muscle. Okay, so now I'm moving in to the lateral view. This is the glenoid cavity. That's where the humerus head would actually be located at. Below that, here is called the infraglenoid tubercle. Below, infra, okay? Below the glenoid cavity. And it is a small bump. We call it a tubercle. So we actually named this infraglenoid tubercle right here, okay? And then we have the coracoid process that is anterior, and the acromion process, which is actually the end of the spine, is posterior. Okay? All right, so I'm finished with my scapula, I'm finished with my clavicle. Both of them will actually create a letter V. The clavicle is in the front, and the scapula is at the back, okay? So the clavicle sits on top of the acromion process. This is where the clavicle will sit, at the acromion process. And then this will actually sit onto the manubrium of the sternum. Okay, so those two bones becomes my pectoral girdle. And it's attached with the extremity at the glenoid cavity. Okay, and remember when we actually started the class, we called the shoulder acromion, right? Because what I'm feeling here to the side is actually the acromion process of the scapula, okay? So acromion, because that's your shoulder. Moving on, now I'm gonna go to the limbs. So the bone on the arm is gonna be called the humerus. That's the only bone in the arm at which is the humerus. Later on, you're going to see the thigh. The bone on the thigh is going to be called a femur. One bone, one bone. Okay? And that is actually the humerus for the arm. So we're going to take a look at the humerus and take a look at the different bumps or markings in that humerus. And we have to put a landmark. I need to know which is anterior posterior. Okay? Once I know anterior posterior, I can know who's medial lateral, so it's superior inferior. So this is going to be the humerus. So how do I know I'm looking at the anterior view and the posterior view? My landmark is the one at the distal end. Okay? I'm going to use this as my landmark. A single fossa, that is going to be at the distal end of the humerus. But here, there's two fossas at the distal end of the humerus. So if I see one fossa, which is called olecranon fossa, I'm going to make this as posterior landmark. So if I see one, that is posterior. If I see two, which is made out of your radial fossa and the coronoid fossa. Radial fossa is on the lateral side. Why did they call it the radial fossa? Because the bone here on the lateral side of the forearm is the radial bone. Okay? And then when you flex the arm, this head of the radial bone will hide at the fossa of the humerus. Okay? So the radial head will hide the fossa of the humerus. Why did they call this coronoid fossa? Because on the medial side is going to be the ulna. And one of the head of the ulna has what you call a coronoid process. So when you flex your arm, the coronoid process of the ulna will hide at the coronoid fossa of the humerus. Okay? So who's the olecranon fossa? Again, if you take a look at the ulna, so I'm going to forward myself to the ulna. The ulna, it looks like a monkey wrench. So this is called the coronoid process. This is called the olecranon process. Okay? So there's two processes on the ulna. So I'm going back now to the humerus. So the olecranon process, which is posterior, olecranon fossa of the humerus, which is posterior. When you extend your elbow, the olecranon process of the ulna will hide at the olecranon fossa of the humerus. Okay, the process and the fossa. So that's actually the combination of two. The process is within another bone. The fossa is at the other bone. Okay, so I have the one fossa posterior, two fossa anterior. Okay, but I'm going to start since I know anterior posterior. I know this is going to be my proximal end, the head of the humerus. That's my proximal end. Okay, so that is the reason why I can identify proximal distal. And then later on, we're going to take a look at the median lateral. And then we know about the anterior posterior now because of the fossa. So on the proximal end of the humerus, okay, there's two bumps. Okay, if you look at the anterior side, the two bumps that you see on the anterior side, one is above and one is below. It's actually quite a medium-sized bump. That's why we call it a tubercle. So the one above, we're going to call it the greater tubercle. And the one below, on the medial side, we call it the lesser tubercle. Okay? Now, when we look at the femur, we also have two bumps similar to this one. Remember, the architecture is the same. The bone of the thigh is the femur. And instead of calling it a greater tubercle in the femur, we call it a greater trochanter, much bigger than the tubercle, and a lesser trochanter. Okay, that's the reason why I'm telling you the architecture is the same. So I've had my two bumps. So if I see the two bumps, that is my anterior view. And again, posterior is the fossa here. This is still my posterior view. Right, so now I'm going through the head of the humerus. There's head of the humerus is round. That's the one that will articulate with the glenoid cavity of the scapula. Okay, so I got two necks on the humerus. I got the anatomical neck just below the head, and I got the surgical neck is on the proximal side. The reason why they call it surgical neck because fracture constantly occurs at this area. That's why we call it surgical neck. Okay, so now I don't have anything that I can identify on the proximal end. I'm finished with my proximal end. Okay, now I'm going to go now to the middle part of my humerus. On the medial side, I mean the lateral side. This is lateral. There's a bump on the lateral side. And that bump is called the deltoid tuberosity. The reason why it's there because the deltoid muscle comes from the top part of the girdle and then inserts at that bump. So this is going to be the deltoid muscle. So when the deltoid muscle contracts, it will bring up the humerus, okay, in what we call abduction. Okay, remember we talked about joints and we have abduction. This is what abduction is of the shoulder, or what we call the glenohumeral joint. That's abduction. So the deltoid tuberosity is on the lateral side of the bone, okay? And on the posterior side of the bone, there's a groove here, okay? And you see the lateral side, you have the deltoid tuberosity. The groove here is called the radial groove. The reason why I call it a radial groove is because there's a nerve that hugs to the back of that humerus. That nerve came from the armpit. That nerve is called the radial nerve. The radial nerve hugs at the posterior side of the humerus and then goes to the posterior part of the humerus and the posterior part of the forearm. That nerve is actually stimulating skeletal muscle. So it'll actually move muscle. So when somebody had a fracture here, in the fracture, it's not going to be a straight cut. Fractures usually have these jagged edges. Remember, if you move that humerus, you're going to cut that nerve called the radial nerve, located at the radial groove. So that will actually paralyze some of the muscles that this nerve will actually innervate, mostly the posterior compartment of the forearm. Okay, so that's going to be the paralysis there. Okay, and also the paralysis is going to be also at your posterior compartment of the arm, the triceps brachii. Okay, so that's the reason why we need to know, because remember, if somebody has a fracture, we put a stent to prevent people from moving that bone, and it has jagged edges, can cut that radial nerve. Okay, so those are the things I see in the middle. Okay, and then after that, I'm going to the distal part of the humerus. So there's two things I want you to look at the side of the humerus. I need to identify an epicondyle, meaning above this condyles. Condyles are like wheels. So these are similar to wheels. The trochlea and the trochlea here in the capitulum. So this bump that is above those condyles is going to be called the lateral epicondyle because it's going away from the head. And then there's a bump here, and also you got the lateral epicondyle here too, okay? So you know it's on the lateral side. And the other one is called the medial. That's where the head is also located at, the medial side. And that bump is going to be called the medial epicondyle, okay? The medial epicondyle. On the femur, you also have that bump at the distal end, the medial and the lateral epicondyle. Similar architecture, as I said, okay? And then after that, we're going to have these two processes. This is called the trochlea, and it looks like a spool of a thread. Okay, that is where the ulna will articulate. Ulna will articulate with that trochlea, and you can see it also in the front. Okay, it looks like a spool of a thread. Now, the ball that you see here onto the lateral side is called the capitulum. And remember, the lateral side has your radial bone. So that's where the radial bone will articulate, at the capitulum. And remember, I don't see it here at the back. I don't see a capitulum at the back. I can only see the capitulum onto the anterior view. Okay? So I'm going to jump over so that we can actually see how the radius and ulna articulates at the distal end. Okay, this is going to be the distal end of the humerus. Okay, now you see this is going to be your ulna. Ulna is on the medial side, on anatomical position. Remember, palm facing forward. And then the radial bone is on the lateral side. Okay, now this is going to be the ball, the capitulum. And this is the trochlea. It looks full of a thread. The head of the radius literally just sits on top of this ball, called the capitulum. It just sits on top of that ball. So that's how it articulates. Now this one, the trochlea, is captured by this ulna, because the ulna looks like a monkey, the monkey wrench. So it grabs onto the trochlea like a letter C. So when it grabs on the trochlea, then it holds onto the trochlea like a hinge. So it will actually just go around that trochlea. Okay, and the top portion is called olecranon process, which will face to the back, and the front process called the coronoid process, which is going to be facing at the front. Okay, so I'm going back to the distal end of the humerus and show you that this is the coronoid process of the ulna. That's going to be always in the front. The olecranon process was actually the one at the back. Okay, and remember, when we did body orientation, what did we call this hard part here in the elbow? We didn't call it elbow anymore. Elbow is English. So this part is called the olecranal. Why did they call it olecranal? Because that's actually this part of the ulna, the olecranon. Okay, so again, it makes sense now. So I'm going to finish up with my humerus, okay? So I know how the radius and ulna articulates. So again, the fossa here is called the radial fossa. When you flex the arm, this head will hide at that fossa. The head of the radius will hide the fossa. That's the reason why we call it a radial fossa, okay? So what is the fossa here in the medial side? That is called the coronoid fossa. On the elbow, when it actually flexes the elbow, the coronoid process of the ulna will hide at the coronoid fossa of the humerus. Okay, this is flexion. So you got to put some gap, some space there whenever there's going to be muscle action. Okay, muscle action produces joint movement. Right. So I'm going to go now and finish up with my humerus. Okay, so everything is done here. So those are the things that I need to identify on this bone. I'm going to move forward, and I'm going to look at the two bones on my forearm, okay? The antebrachium. The two bones are called your radius and ulna. So ulna looks like a monkey wrench, and this is how they look like. So the radius and ulna are side by side. It's connected in the middle with what we call the interosseous membrane, okay? But you can still rotate the radius and ulna, okay? Not as much as movement, okay? You can actually do this, and the radius and ulna will just cross each other because there's still what we call the interosseous membrane, okay? Prevent any other kind of movement. So we're gonna take a look at the proximal end of the radius and ulna. So this is gonna be the anterior proximal end. So what do we see on the anterior proximal end? I see the head of the ulna, I mean the radius, and you can actually feel the bump at the anterior end of this radius. It is called the radial tuberosity. Okay. Then on the part of the ulna, on the anterior view, I can see the tube process. This is called the olecranon process. Okay. And this one at the bottom is called the coronoid process. So the olecranon process is actually better viewed from the posterior end. This is the olecranon process. And this is the head of the radius. Okay. So there's no radial tuberosity at the posterior view of the radius. Now, if I look down in the middle, I don't have anything there on the middle, okay? There's nothing, no bumps, nothing. It's clean, okay, on the middle. Then when I look down at the distal end, okay, the two bones will actually join together, but there's less movement there. And there's going to be two bumps here at the distal end. Those two bumps are styloid process, okay? The styloid process. This is going to be the styloid process of the ulna. This is going to be the styloid process of the radius, okay? On to the leg. Remember, I said same architecture. The radius and ulna is actually at the end of the limb. The leg is the end of the limb, okay? On the leg, there's two bones also, tibia and fibula. And they also have this type, but that's actually bigger. So instead of calling it a styloid process, on the leg, the tibia and fibula has what we call the malleolus. Okay, we'll see that later on. So the styloid process of the ulna is located at the medial side. Okay, and the styloid process of the radius is located at the lateral side. Okay, all right. So this is one of the questions on the exam tomorrow. This is for sure, okay? I'm pretty sure it can be one of the questions. Which bone has the medial styloid process? Or it could be which bone has the lateral styloid process? Okay, so take a look at this distal end. Which is the lateral and the medial bone? Remember, anatomical position, thumb facing outward. Follow the thumb. That's your radial bone. Okay, follow the thumb. Okay, let me actually get something first, okay? Okay, so give me 1 minute. I'm gonna get some tea. All right, so we're back, okay? So just remember that your okay, I don't know what's going to happen if I say keep. Okay, so I'm gonna share it again. All right, so we're back here, radius and ulna. Okay, so the answer for the medial styloid process, remember, anatomical position, palms facing forward. So my thumb is always pointed lateral, and whenever I see my thumb, that is the radial bone, okay? Because remember, what is the pulse for the base of my thumb? That's called a radial pulse. Why did we call it radial pulse? Because that's your radial artery. Why did we call it radial artery? Because on top, below that is going to be your radial bone, okay? That's what anatomy is. So the answer to the medial, okay, side of process, pinky, is called the ulna. So the answer there is going to be the ulna. So what is the bone on the lateral styloid process? The answer is the radius. Okay. So I would appreciate that whenever you read the pretest, okay, don't memorize the pretest. Understand the pretest. Because a lot of people think that anatomy is merely memorization. It is memorization. But in order for you to actually master anatomy, you got to understand the question on the pretest and why this is the answer and why this is not the answer. Okay, and that's actually how to study anatomy. Because remember, you got a way to actually take a look at anatomy as a form of identification. So you got to have landmarks there. So whenever you see the pretest and it gives you the answer, don't just memorize the answer just because of this question. Try to analyze why is this the answer. Okay, and now I know that my lateral styloid process is coming from the radius. Okay, why? Because radial bone is on the lateral side. Okay, all right. So I'm finished with my radius and ulna. Now I'm going to my wrist. This is my wrist bone. So this is what radius looks like individually. Okay, so the electron pulse is located at the back will hide the electron fossa of the humerus. The head, when you extend the arm, it cannot hide on anything here. That's why there's no fossa for the radius here. The only fossa that you'll have is from the front. Okay, so we're going to be looking now at the wrist bone. We call it carpal bones. Okay, carpal bones. Now take a look at the carpal bones. There's 8 of them. 4 on the proximal row. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is the palm facing forward picture. This is going to be my left palm. Okay, so that's the reason why I can see the 4 on the proximal end of the carpal bone. If I take a look at the back, if I'm looking at the back of my arm, okay, if I'm looking here, I only see 3. It's going to be 1. Okay, so I'm going to start here. 1, 2, and 3. So where did the 4th go? The 4th is this bone here called the pisiform. So the reason why you cannot see it because it's on top of number 3. Okay, so the first 4 carpal bones, 1, 2, 3, and 4, you can see it from the anterior view. Okay, but if you turn your hand and you look at the posterior view, you cannot see the pisiform because number 3 is going to be the triquetrum where the pisiform sits. Okay, but when you look at the back of the palm, the only thing you can see is the triquetrum because where's the pisiform? It's actually in front of triquetrum. So there's only 3 that you see at the back of your palm. Okay, but we're going to be identifying all 8 of this bone. Okay, all 8 of this bone because it's going to be right easy. Okay, and then there's 4 at the distal end of the row of the wrist bone. It's going to be 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 bones. Here you can actually see 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so you can actually see all 4 at the distal end of the carpal, front or back of the palm. Okay, so we're gonna start identifying the bones. Okay, anatomical position, palms facing forward. I'm gonna start identifying from the thumb side. Okay, always thumb side. So I'm gonna actually identify the first 4 bones onto the thumb side on the proximal end. First one is Sally left the party. That's not the name of the bone. It's the mnemonics, all identifying the different carpal bones, okay? So again, Sally left the party. Lateral to medial, thumb to pinky, okay? And then you should see your palm facing forward to you, and you can actually see Sally left the party. Who's Sally? Sally is scaffold. Left, lunate. Okay, take a look at the words. Lunate looks like a moon. Then the, triquetral. Okay, party, pisiform. So those are the 4 bones located here at the proximal end of the wrist bone or carpal bones. Okay, again, let's take a look again. Okay, some side first. Number 1, Sally, scaphoid. Number 2, left, lunate. Number 3, the, triquetrum. Number 4, party, pisiform. Okay, that is your pisiform. Okay, so take a look at number 3 and 4. Isn't 3 triquetrum and 4 is pisiform? 4 is seated on top of triquetrum. Number 4 is pissing off triquetrum. Why? It's sitting on top of triquetrum. So number 3, triquetrum, is trying to quit. Okay? That's how anatomy works. That is how anatomy works. Association, and later on, let's go to the nervous system, you can actually see there's a part of the brain that associates your senses. And that's how memorization works, okay? And I'm telling you this right now, okay? Because, you know, these are things that I noticed when I went to med school, okay? When I went to med school, I noticed that there were people who can memorize stuff. I mean, I'm so amazed. And I'm looking at myself and say, why am I not capable of doing that, okay? Why am I having a difficulty time memorizing? So they actually memorized stuff but they did not really memorize stuff. They really had somebody, like a brother of them, that actually told them, this is how you should memorize. Me, I didn't have a brother who went to med school. I went as myself, just me. So I had to survive. So I noticed that they're using mnemonics. They're using mnemonics. I said to myself, what is a mnemonics for? And then when I went in neurology, I noticed that senses has an association area. So whatever you associate with a sense, it goes into memory. Okay. One example that I noticed: if you leave your key on anywhere at home, like for example, you came home, you leave your key somewhere. The next day, you can say, "Where's my key?" It's gone. Why? Because you didn't associate where you placed the key. Okay. But if you actually do this next day, okay, next time, leave your key and associate with something. Like the key is close to the mouse. That's all. Visual association, sensory vision. Okay. So next day, you can actually go and say, "Where's my key?" You couldn't find it. And then suddenly your brain would say, "A mouse." There you go. That's your key. That's how the brain works. Okay. And also, have you noticed that sometimes when you smell perfume, it triggers memory, the perfume of your boyfriend. So why did it trigger? Your boyfriend, you were out, you're not together for 20 years. It still triggers the memory because it's an association. And that's how your brain has to work, okay? And that is how memorization and anatomy is, okay? And I'm telling you this right now because you're going to go to MCAT, NCLEX exam, licensing exam. And you're going to have a lot of these things and it's going to be bombarded in your brain. So the way to actually help you guys out is to show you how I do anatomy. How I do anatomy is number 1, landmark. This is actually from the point of view of a surgeon. Okay? My training is surgery. So the point of view of surgery is start with a landmark. on what structure am I looking at. And when I look at the front, back, side, up, superior, inferior, medial, lateral. So when I have my landmark, then I can know, okay, so the part of the heart is going to be here, the tricuspid valve is here, bicuspid valve is here, even though the heart is closed. Okay? On an operation, we cannot just open the heart and say, oh, that's the tricuspid valve. No, we have to look for a landmark. And that's exactly what I'm doing right now, okay? Sally left the party, thumb to pinky. Now you're gonna say, okay, how would I know who's Sally? Scaphoid, okay? Take a look at the bone. It looks like a scallop, curved. That's a scaphoid, okay? So you can actually take a look at the first 4 bones at the proximal end. The only bone that looks like a scallop is number 1, okay? That's your scaphoid, right? So I know one number 1, so I know number 2, number 3, and number 4 because I'm counting thumb to pinky. Thumb to pinky, always. Sally, scaphoid, left, lunate, the, triquetral, party, pisiform. Then I give you an association. Who's number 3 and number 4? Number 4 is pisiform. He's sitting on triquetrum. So number 4 is pissing off because it's pisiform. Pisiform, triquetrum. Number 3, triquetrum. Number 3 is trying to quit. Okay, that's how memory is. Okay, and then after that you go to 5, 6, and 7, and 8. Again, thumb to pinky. Okay, if you turn your hand, thumb to pinky. That's how you study the carpal bone. So what is 5, 6, 7, 8? So Sally left the party. 5, 6, 7, 8 is to take Carmen home. To take Carmen home. So what is TNT? To take. To take is trapezium and then trapezoid. So if I'm in the exam, I'm going to say, oh, who's first, trapezium or trapezoid? Trapezium, trapezoid. Remember, trapezium, oh, it's thumb to pinky. Is first. Why? Compared to trapezoid. Why? Trapezium is with a letter I, alphabetical, and the trapezoid is with a letter O. Okay? Trapezium, trapezoid. To take. Carmen, capitate, then home, hammock. What is hammock? A hammer. So the bone would look like a hammer. It has a handle and a head of a hammer. Okay? So that's how you memorize the carpal bone. Sally left the party to take Carmen home. Okay? If I turn around, always thumb to pinky. Sally left the party to take Carmen home. Okay? Again, memorization is actually a trick. Okay? So if you actually say, I'm not good at memorization because you didn't know how to do the trick. Okay? So next, after the carpal bones, finish with the carpal bones, the ends after the carpal bones are called the metacarpal. The metacarpal, okay? Question number 48 of my exam. What is the tip of the knuckle? It says the phalange, which is the digits, or the metacarpal. The metacarpal is the tip of your knuckle. Okay, that's going to be the metacarpal. The metacarpal bones are covered by what you call your skin. Okay, creating the hand. And then the tips is going to be my phalanges. 3 on each finger, except for the thumb. There's only 2. So they call it the name. The phalanges are the names of location: proximal phalange, middle phalange, and distal phalange. The thumb is only 2, so you can only say proximal and distal phalange, right? And then we're done with your upper extremity. Okay, so now we're moving on to the pelvic girdle. Okay, so the pelvic girdle now, we have a girdle on the pelvic, and it's going to be your pelvic bone. Okay, sometimes called the hip bone, sometimes it's called the cos oxae. Okay, and that's going to be your pelvic girdle. The structure is quite similar to the upper extremity, which is going to be your shoulder and connected to the clavicle. So we're going to take a look at the pelvic bone, and the pelvic girdle is actually formed by two sides, okay? That is going to be hip bone. It's fused together from the front, and then at the back is a sacral vertebrae that holds the two ends at the back, okay? The sacral vertebrae is not an appendicular skeleton, okay? Where did we mention the sacral vertebrae? We actually mentioned the sacral vertebrae as part of the vertebral column. And the vertebral column is axial skeleton, okay? So if I were you, I would actually just eliminate this because we're just actually looking at the pelvic bone. Pelvic bone is actually the pelvic girdle, and that is actually appendicular skeleton of the lower limbs, okay? So what are the three parts of this pelvic bone? So remember, when you were a child, when you're born, why couldn't you walk, okay? Because there's three bones there that are not fused, okay? The three bones is going to be called the ilium. This is the first bone, okay? And this is the bone, another bone on top called the pubic bone. And this is the bone that goes on the bottom. And this is called the ischium, okay? There's actually a three bone, ilium, pubic, and an ischium. So when you're born, they weren't fused. That's the reason why you can never walk, okay? But remember, horses, when they're born, they can run right away, okay? Because it's necessity for them. If you actually cannot run, animals can eat you alive, okay? And that's actually the reason why they actually what do you call this? They actually change the way that they're born, in which they have to be born with the pelvic bone fused, or else they won't be able to run. Us, we don't have that, okay? Because ever since that we were born, mothers will actually carry us and protect us. So we're just actually sitting there like, okay, I'm here for 8 months before I start to walk. And that's actually the earliest one that can probably walk is 8 months, okay? At the age of 8 months, that means you see the child stand up because he's starting to walk. And those starting to walk means the three bones are fused, okay? So that's the ilium, pubic, and ischium, okay? So those are the three bones that we're going to be looking at, okay? But I want you to disregard the sacrum because I'm going to give you one bone on one side, and that's how we study anatomy, okay? So I'm going to give you this bone in order for you to actually identify on the exam. These are the two sides of the pelvic bone. It still has the ilium. The color tan is the ilium. The color purple is the ischium. And the color red is the pubic bone, okay? The pubic bone. Now, the names of the structures that we need to identify here are actually starting with the word anterior, superior, posterior, superior, posterior, inferior, posterior, superior, posterior, inferior, okay? They have names such as location. So that's the reason why we gotta make a landmark, okay? So number one, how do I know which is my anterior and a posterior view, okay, of this pelvic bone? That's the first thing. So we know that this acetabulum, the acetabulum is a cavity in which the head of the femur will articulate, okay? Do you remember what is that in the pectoral girdle? So we actually had an acetabulum with the head of the femur. In the pectoral girdle, that was a glenoid cavity with the head of the humerus. Again, I said architecture of the upper and lower extremity, they're the same, okay? Similarity. So the acetabulum, if I see my acetabulum, that is my lateral, okay? So you start with landmarks first, always. I want to orient myself who's lateral, who's anterior, who's posterior, who's superior, inferior, and that's how I start with anatomical structure, okay? So I know my lateral, the acetabulum, okay? And then after that, I'm gonna take a look at this part here. It is rough, okay? It is rough. Remember, what used to sit on this part of the pelvic bone, that was the sacrum, okay? That's the reason why it's rough, because the sacrum was there. So if I see that rough part of the iliac bone, this is the iliac bone. If I see the rough part there, I know this is posterior, okay? So already know my posterior. So if I know my posterior, it's easy to know it's my anterior here, okay? So everything that you see here is going to be depressed at the anterior part of the iliac bone. Since it is a depression, we're going to call it the iliac fossa. Okay. How about the one onto the lateral side? But this one is actually much more on the posterior side of the iliac. This is the iliac bone posterior side. It looks like a wing. So it's curved outward. Okay. That means wing. So we call it alley. Okay. Wing, alley. So the posterior part of the pelvic bone looks like a wing. We call it an alley. I mean the part that is facing to the posterior lateral side. Okay, that is called the alley, right? So I already have my anterior, posterior, lateral, and the other side here, opposite to the acetabulum, is going to be my medial. Okay, then this part of the iliac bone, the top part is the iliac bone that's superior. And the ischium is the one that you sit on, okay? This part here is the one you sit on. That's why it's rugged. Yeah, it is your inferior, okay? So now I have my orientation now. Superior, inferior, anterior, posterior, lateral, posterior lateral, and then anterior lateral, okay? So I can actually now know the location. So the next step is to name, okay? So we're gonna name them. I need to take it out, okay? So I'm gonna name spines, okay? But remember, this is gonna be my, exactly, I'm gonna make it darker. Okay, so this is gonna be my iliac bone, ischium, the one you sit on, pubis is the front part of your pelvic bone. So the three bones would actually meet each other here at the acetabulum. That's the first one, okay? The three bones meet here. This hole is only created by two bones, the ischium and the pubis. So this hole is going to be called your obturator foramen. It's created by only two bones, the ischium and the pubis. That is called the obturator foramen. Okay? So next, after that, I'm going to take a look at my spine. This is a spine. This is a spine. This is a spine. And then this is a spine. And then this is a spine. I'm going to look at my spine here. This is a spine. This is a spine. This is a spine. This is a spine. And this is a spine. Okay. So now I'm going to name them based on location. Okay. This is a spine of the iliac bone, right? These two are spines of the iliac bone. So it has to have the word IS, iliac spine. Iliac spine. And then this spine is from the ischium. So I'm just going to call it ischial spine. There's only one ischial spine, posterior, okay? But the iliac bone, there's going to be anterior superior, anterior inferior, posterior superior, posterior inferior. So since we know that this is going to be where the sacrum is, so I'm going to call it the posterior superior iliac spine, okay? Again, technique and memorization is to put in an acronyms to make it easy for your brain to associate, okay? PSIS, so we call it a PSIS. Posterior, superior, iliac spine, okay? I can actually visualize where it is because I know it is an iliac bone spine. It's on the posterior, superior part of that iliac bone, okay? So that's PSIS. And the one below that is going to be my PIS. Posterior, inferior iliac spine. Okay, so it's still part of the iliac bone. So I got my PSIS, PIIS, and then the one in the ischial spine. Okay, so I got 3 spines on the posterior end, and I can only count 2 on the anterior end. Okay, again, this is the iliac spine, so I'm going to put an IS there, and I know it is anterior superior, so I'm going to call it ASIS, anterior superior iliac spine. Okay, so what do you think I should call the one below this ASIS? Okay, so you start again. You know it's an iliac spine. You're going to put IS there. And you know it's the anterior, but it's inferior. So I'm going to say AIIS. Anterior, inferior, iliac spine. Okay, so ready to put my spines there. Okay, I'm done with my spines. Now I'm going to look at this notch. This notch between PIIS and ischial spine. That's one notch. Then there's another notch here. Okay, this notch is called the greater sciatic notch. Okay, your sciatic nerve passes through that notch. And then the one at the bottom, okay, is smaller. So I'm going to call it lesser sciatic notch. Okay, so in terms of identification, it's easy. In terms of theoretical question on the lecture exam, I'm going to ask you which notch is between the PSIS and the PIIS. What do you call that notch? Is it greater or lesser? That is greater sciatic notch. Okay. So again, don't just visualize it. You should be able to actually explain it in words. Right, and then we're going to actually go now into the crest. Okay, you got a crest here called the iliac crest. A little bit sharp, you can feel on top. Okay, all right. So I'm finished with all the parts that I need to identify on this hip bone. Okay, so this is called the hip bone, or what we call the cos oxae. Those are the different names. I mean, os coxae, or hip bone, or coxal bone. Right? Okay, so we're finished with that one, and we're moving on. Okay, so we got the hip bone, and we're gonna go and take a look at. Okay, so this is actually a name that we actually write. So this is a line between the pubic bone to the sacral promontory, the part of the sacrum that protrudes inward. Anything in on that imaginary line, okay, is called false pelvis. Anything below that imaginary line is called the true pelvis. Okay, so that's actually true and false pelvis. And now we're actually going now into, this actually shows you what the difference between male and female would look like. Okay, so look at a female. The sacrum is more outward on the female, but on the male, the sacrum is more inward. Okay, so that baby's head would not go if that was a male. If the male is the one delivering the baby or having the baby, trust me, it's going to be cesarean section. Okay, because take a look at coccyx. It's actually protruding inward, so the baby's head will never pass through there. Okay, will never pass through there. And take a look at the cavity, the pelvic cavity. So this is going to be a female. It's wider. Okay, a male, it's narrower, so it will never pass through there. Okay, so if you're actually thinking of male can actually take later on in the future can carry the babies, never. Okay, anatomy. Okay, all right. Next, you're gonna have the lower limb now. Okay, I have to fill in my girdle. The only thing I can have to do is going to be my thigh, my leg, my tarsals, which is similar to the carpal bones, my metatarsals, which is similar to the metacarpal bones, and the phalanges, which is similar to the hand of my fingers. That mine is my toes on the foot. Okay, so we only have 5-legged foot. Now for the lower limb, okay, so we have the thigh bone. It's going to be called the femur. Take a look at the difference between the humerus. The femur here is elongated, okay, because the acetabulum is deep. That's why, and it's deep, so it actually can carry weight because it grabs onto the head of the femur. So the head of the femur is actually bigger, and then you got the neck longer. Only one neck. So on the humerus, you have the anatomical neck and the surgical neck. But here, you only have one neck. Unfortunately, that neck is going to be the common places for fracture. That is going to be called the hip fracture. Okay, so there's a neck, and then again, take a look at the bumps here. Remember, we had that on the humerus. We're at the proximal end. The bump is called the trochanter. The humerus, it was the tubercle, and we have the greater trochanter, lesser trochanter. But on the humerus, it was located at the anterior side. Okay, on the femur, the trochanters are located at the posterior side. Okay, so again, I'm going to start looking for a landmark first before we actually go on. The posterior part has a depression here on the distal end of the femur. And that depression is called the intercondylar fossa. The front has no depression. It is called the patellar surface because that's where the patella sits. Okay, so now I got my intercondylar fossa as my landmark, distal end that is posterior, and I got the trochanters as posterior. Okay, so I got my trochanters, and then after that, a little bit onto the bottom of the trochanters. Okay, that is going to be a tuberosity, and this is going to be the gluteal tuberosity. Gluteus muscle grabs onto that part. Okay, so on your arm, remember the humerus, it also has a tuberosity, but a little bit lower than this tuberosity. It is called the deltoid tuberosity. Same architecture. Okay, so go mid portion of the femur. On the humerus, okay, you have a radial groove. That's actually a groove that actually you see an indentation there, the posterior end of the radius. But on the femur, the part of the femur that's posterior, it's sharp, not by a nerve, but because it's sharp, it's because of its structure. So that is called the linea aspera. The linea aspera, the sharp part of the posterior end of the femur, is called the linea aspera. So if I feel that, okay, because what I do is sometimes on the bone, the only thing I would actually feel is the front is smooth and the back, there's something sharp there. And when I feel the linea aspera, I know I'm at the posterior end of this femur. This is sharp, okay? So now we go to the distal end. On the distal end, again, lateral epicondyle, medial epicondyle. We had that on the humerus. Same thing. Lateral and the medial epicondyle. Same name, same location. The only difference is this. If you actually see this structure here below the epicondyle, this would actually look like wheels. It looks like a wheel of a motorcycle. So whenever you hear the word condyle, that means wheels. Okay. So now I got a lateral condyle that is on the lateral side, the wheel on the lateral side, and I got a medial condyle with a wheel on the medial side. And then the bump onto the medial side, on the distal end, is called a medial epicondyle, and on the lateral distal end, lateral epicondyle. Okay, so those are the things that I see: anterior, posterior, superior, inferior. Okay, and that's actually what I actually just need to identify with the femur. Okay, so we're done with the femur. Now the patella is actually a small sesamoid bone, so it's just like a bone, a small bone. And it actually is protected in the knee anteriorly. It's held by tendons of the quads. So the quads actually are held into the tendon to the knee. Okay. So my leg has two bones. Remember, my arm, my forearm has two bones too. So I got the radius and ulna. My leg, I got the tibia and fibula, but who's lateral, who's medial. My arm, forearm, is the radial bone is lateral. On my leg, the fibula is lateral. Okay, the fibula is lateral. So the medial position is the tibia. So that's actually the position we'll be looking at the two bones of the leg. Lateral and the medial, okay? Medial is tibia, lateral is fibula. Okay? Again, you got interosseous membrane there, similar to the radius and ulna. So, but there's not a lot of movement in that area, okay? So it's just like to hold the two bones together. All right, so I know this is my proximal end, okay, because I have this articular surface, and in between are like horns called intercondylar eminence. Okay, that's what you have there. Okay, and then we have the tibial tuberosity. And remember, the radius had the radial tuberosity. Then after looking at all of this, looking down at the midshaft, nothing much at the midshaft, but at the distal end, you have this big bumps called the lateral malleolus and the medial malleolus. Remember, I told you these are similar to the styloid process we have on the wrist. The lateral styloid process by the radial bone. The medial styloid process is actually done by the ulnar bone. Okay. Now the thing about that is, who does the malleolus? Okay. Who has the medial malleolus? Okay. Who has the medial malleolus? So the medial malleolus is going to be the tibia. Why? The tibia is in the medial side. Who has the lateral malleolus? The lateral malleolus is actually going to be the fibula. Okay, the bump you feel onto the distal end of your leg, those are the malleolus. Okay, got lateral malleolus and the medial malleolus. Okay, so that's the distal end. So I'm finished with that. The next after the tibia and fibula, okay, is going to be the instead of the carpal or wrist bone, we call it the tarsal bone. Okay, but they're bigger. Instead of Sally left the party to take Carmen home. So tarsus, the bone on the tarsal bone is going to be in sequence. Okay, so the first bone is this bone on top. That's the one that carries the tibia. So this is your bone on top. So this is carrying the tibia. So that bone is called the talus. Okay, that is the talus. You can actually see it on the top view. There, talus. The tibia will sit on this talus. And then after that, I got, that's actually, the talus is also another name for ankle bone. Now, who would this be? The calcaneus. And that's going to be your heel bone. Okay, looking at the lateral view of the foot. Okay, this is going to be the calcaneus, the heel bone. And the talus is the one on top. Okay, and you always have a curve. That's why you're not flat-footed. Okay, if you're flat-footed, it means there's no curve there. It's actually producing great varied balance if you tiptoe from the ankle, tip of the heel bone, and to the tip of the phalanges. So that's actually more stable. That's what they said, right? So after the talus, the next bone at the bottom is going to be the calcaneus. Okay, talus is ankle bone, and calcaneus is called heel bone. Okay, those are the first two. Then after that, you only have one in the middle. Okay, one in the middle. Okay, doesn't it look like a belly button? Because there's only one in the middle. So I'm going to call it navicular. Navicular is actually the single tarsal bone after the tarsal bone. Okay, so that's called navicular, right? And then after that, you got the four of the tarsal at the distal end. Okay, So this line, the three of them are called cuneiforms. And it just tells you location. Medial, lateral, intermediate cuneiforms. Okay, so I'm going to show further on the other picture from the top view. Okay, so this is called the navicular. Only one, like a belly button. And then after the navicular, the three is going to be your cuneiform. Okay, and it's also location. Medial, intermediate cuneiform, and lateral cuneiform. Okay, so we got three cuneiforms after the navicular. And then the last one is going to be the lateral side. That is going to be called your cuboid. It's going to be your cuboid. Then after finishing that, we have this metatarsals. The one that is covered by the sole of your foot. Then last is going to be called your phalanges. Middle, distal, middle, and proximal. Okay. Okay, so all right, that's actually the end of your appendiculars. Okay, so all right, so now let's actually okay, so we have 8:30. Okay, and I want to go through a little bit on the models. Okay, so I know it's been a long time for a lecture, but let's actually just get a 20-minute break. Okay, just do a 20-minute break, and then we'll come back, and then we'll actually go to the last part, which is going to be the appendicular skeletal models, and that will end our day. And make sure, okay, schedule yourself, do those pre-tests and your lab exercise. Okay, just a 20-minute break, and I might not even close this because I don't want to actually get two of this thing. Okay, so it's 8:28, 20 minutes, 8:50 then. Yeah. So I'm just gonna close my video and then mute and mute. Okay, so I did All right. I forgot it wasn't mute, so let me open it up again. Okay, and this is supposed to be what you have on the screen. Okay, so the screen shows you about the skull right now. Okay, so if you're not seeing it, let me know so that I can reshare it again. But this is what I'm seeing on the screen. Okay, and you can actually see the skull, but we're gonna do the lower appendicular skeleton. Okay, so we're gonna move forward. Okay, and we're gonna go to the girdles. Okay, this was the eggshell skeleton. It started as the eggshell skeleton, and now we're gonna go into your appendicular skeleton. Okay, so your appendicular skeleton is gonna be made between your. Okay, so let me see if I can actually write on this one. I don't have my pen. No, it's not viewing my pen. Okay, so what you have is your clavicle. Okay, so this is going to be the clavicle, and this is going to be the scapula. And the area where the head of the humerus articulates is going to be called the glenoid cavity. Okay, so this is how it looks like on your pectoral girdle. Okay, at the back, you can see that the head articulates with the glenoid cavity of the scapula. And here you can see the spine. This is called the scapular spine. On this model, it looks a little bit higher than the picture that we have. So this is your scapular spine. So whatever you have here at the bottom, and that's going to be your, whatever you have here in the bottom, that is going to be your infraspinous fossa of the scapula. And then you have here onto the top portion, that's going to be your supraspinous fossa. And then since this is your spine here, okay, and at the tip of the spine is going to be your acromion process, okay? So this is going to be your acromion process at the tip of the spine. And then we have the medial border. So take a look at the medial border. It's parallel with the vertebrae. And this is going to be the lateral border, superior border. And then you have the notch here. And that notch is called your suprascapular notch. Okay, so we're moving on. This was the sternum. Okay, so we're finished with that one. Now this is the scapula. Okay, again, this is going to be the scapular spine. At the tip is going to call acromion process. Okay, and in front is what you call the coracoid process. And then this is your notch. Okay, called the suprascapular notch, much seen on the anterior side of the scapula. You know it's on the anterior side because there's no spine disturbing this fossa called the subscapular fossa. And what you have in the anterior part of the scapula is going to be called the coracoid process. But if you take a look at the posterior one, end of the spine is called the acromion process. Okay, this is the lateral view. What you're seeing right now is the glenoid cavity. So the acromion process is the posterior, and the coracoid process is the anterior. All right, so now we have the clavicle. Okay, so remember, I'm looking for the side that goes to the sternum. So the blunt end, okay, is called the sternal end or the medial end. And the flat end that is actually similar to the duck's beak, that's going to be the acromial or the lateral end, okay? And then here, I see a bump here, and that bump is going to be the cunoid tubercle. It's going to be the cunoid tubercle, okay? And this is how they articulate. So the clavicle, the flat end of the clavicle articulates with the flat end of the acromion process of the scapula. And they create what we call a letter V. So take a look at that letter V. Okay, so it actually looks like a letter V. Going forward, I'm at the humerus now. Okay, so I'm going to start off with identifying my landmark. Okay, So my landmark is going to be this single fossa at the bottom. That is called the olecranon fossa. So one fossa, that means it is my posterior view. Then the two fossas, okay, let me actually take this out first. The two fossas you see in the bottom, that's going to be the anterior view. The one on the lateral side, the radial bone is there, that's called the radial fossa. Okay. And then the one on the medial side, your ulnar bones there, that's going to be called the coronoid fossa. Okay. And then I would have the tubercles, the anterior view, the greater tubercle and the lesser tubercle, that's the anterior view. Remember, the femur has that as a trochanter, greater trochanter, lesser trochanter, but it's on the posterior view. And I got the head of the humerus, and beneath that right away is the anatomical neck, and then here is going to be the surgical neck. Okay, and then on the midshaft, on the lateral side, on both of this picture, that's called the deltoid tuberosity. Remember, it's lateral. And then at the posterior side of the midshaft, there's an oblique indentation that's going to be called the radial groove. Okay. Now on the distal end, you're going to see that you got the two fossas in the anterior side, radial fossa, coronoid fossa. And then we have these two processes. The one that's round, that's one where the radial bone articulates, it's called the capitulum. And the one that looks like a spool of a thread, that is going to be called the trochlea. Okay. You can only see the trochlea in the posterior end. The capitulum is not seen in the posterior side. Okay. And then the epicondyles are the ones to the corners, the lateral epicondyle and the medial epicondyle. Here is the medial epicondyle and the lateral epicondyle. Remember, medial epicondyle points towards the head of the humerus. Then we're going to go and take a look at this part here, okay? The greater and the lesser tubercle. It's the anterior side. That's your landmark. Then here is going to be the greater tubercle. You can see it from the back, but the lesser tubercle, you won't see it on the back. And then the distal end on the anterior side, you got the two processes called the capitulum and the trochlea. Okay. On top of the capitulum is a radial fossa. On top of the trochlea on the anterior side is a coronoid fossa. And this is my epicondyle and my epicondyle. How do you know it's medial and lateral? Just by looking at this bone. I don't need to see the whole bone. If you just give me this bone, I can actually tell you who's medial and lateral. Because what is the capitulum? What bone is articulated with the capitulum? That's your radial bone. Isn't your radial bone onto the lateral side? That's why we're going to call this the lateral epicondyle. Okay? So make sure that you're actually just not saying, I don't see the whole bone. No, there's still landmarks that can utilize identifying the medial and lateral with this part. Okay. Now, this is what the radius and ulna looks like. Okay. Remember, radial bone is lateral, ulnar bone is medial. Okay. And if I see the notch, that is going to be my anterior view of the whole bone of this radius and ulna. And that is the trochlear notch. And then if I see the olecranon process, that's the posterior view of the ulna. Okay. Now, the obvious thing that is below the radial head is going to be the neck and this tuberosity called the radial tuberosity. Okay. For the ulna, there's nothing much that you can actually see, even on the midshaft. But the radius and ulna, this distal end, you can actually see the styloid process. So who has the lateral styloid process? And if you take a look, the radial bone is wider on the distal end. Okay, so that's another clue. The radial bone is wider on the distal end compared to the ulna, which is narrower. So if I just give you a picture of this bone, you still can actually determine who's lateral, who's the lateral styloid process and includes the medial styloid process. The lateral styloid process is actually belonging into the radial bone, okay? Because radial bone is lateral. So this is called the lateral styloid process, and this is called the medial styloid process, which is the ulna. Okay, moving forward, this is the articulation of the elbow, which is going to be the humerus and the radius and ulna. Okay, so the radial head articulates with the capitulum and then hides at the radial fossa. The choroid process of the ulna articulates with the trochlea at the anterior end and hides at the coronoid fossa of the humerus. This is the posterior side of your elbow. The olecranon process is the ulna, okay? On extension, this is called the olecranon process. On extension, will hide into the olecranon fossa of the humerus, okay? So that's actually how it looks like, okay? Moving forward, this is what the ulna looks like. It looks like a monkey wrench. The top process called the olecranon, okay? And the bottom process is called the coronoid process. Olecranon and a coronoid, okay? And this is going to be the trochlear notch, the one that articulates with the trochlea of the humerus. Now we're at the hands, into the carpal, metacarpal, and the phalanges, okay? So the carpals, the first bone, okay? Remember, I have to look if it's on the palm, okay? Am I looking at the palm, or am I looking at the back of the hand? I'm looking at the back of the hand, okay? So remember to count pinky to thumb to pinky, which is lateral to medial. So I see this part here that looks like a scallop, okay? That is called scaphoid. Sally, left, lunate, the, triquetral. And here, I don't see pisiform because I'm looking at the back of the hand. The pisiform is hidden here. So the next four is going to be trapezium to take Carmen home. Trapezium, then trapezoid. Remember, I said alphabetical. I first, then O. Thumb to pinky. Trapezium, trapezoid, then Carmen, capitate, home, Hammett. Okay, so those are my carpals. And these are my metacarpals, 5 of them. And then the last one is going to be my phalanges, 3 on each side, 3 on each finger, except for the thumb, there's only 2. Okay, right? So that is what I see on this metacarpals. See, it says palm. Okay, so when looking at the palm, I don't see the pisiform. Now, this is going to be your pelvic bone. Okay, remember, it's 3 bones: the iliac, the ischium is the one you sit on, and the pubis is the one in front. Okay, so this is called the obturator foramen, the hole between the ischium and the pubic bone. And this is actually called the acetabulum, created by the 3 bones. Okay, now who's the anterior part here and who's the posterior part? Okay, so now I'm seeing this rough edge of this pelvic bone. That means that is where the sacrum used to be. So if I see this, I'm going to say posterior. This is going to be my posterior right here. And this is my anterior. Okay, so this is going to be where the rough edge is going to be. That is going to be posterior. This is anterior. Right? Now I have notch and spines to identify. So I'm going to identify the superior, the iliac spine first. Okay, there's 2 in the anterior, only 2. ASIS, anterior superior iliac spine. AIIS, anterior inferior iliac spine. And then the posterior, I have 2 iliac spines. The PSIS, posterior superior iliac spine, and the PIIS, posterior inferior iliac spine. And then I have this spine at the ischium. I'm going to call it ischial spine. And then I have a notch between the PIIS and ischial spine. That is called your greater sciatic notch. Okay? And below that is going to be called the lesser sciatic notch. Okay? And then this sharp end of the iliac bone, that is called my iliac crest. Okay? All right, so I'm looking at the whole bone itself. Okay, so this is posterior, this is anterior. So this is supposed to be where my PSIS, posterior superior iliac spine, and the PIIS is hidden by the sacrum. And this is going to be my anterior superior iliac spine, anterior inferior iliac spine, right here. Okay, so I can still see those spines, but other spines are hidden by the vertebrae. So this is the back of the sacrum. So this is going to be my posterior inferior iliac spine, posterior superior iliac spine, and then ischial spine on this part. Okay. All right. So now after we finish with the pelvic bone, we're now at the thigh. Okay. Remember, the architecture is the same as the humerus. I got a head, I got a neck, okay, and then I got these two processes that is called trochanters, but on the humerus we call it the tubercles, and on the humerus it was located at the anterior, but on the femur we call it at the posterior. Okay, again, landmarks first. So I'm going to look at my landmark, and this is going to be my landmark in which I had two wheels. And in between is called the intercondylar fossa. Remember, we actually also had that landmark on the humerus, which is a single fossa called the olecranon fossa. So I got my two wheels. So I know this is posterior. Okay. So I'm going back into the proximal end. Head, neck, and this is the greater and the lesser trochanter, more obvious on the posterior side. I can still see it on the anterior side. Okay. But this is more obvious on the posterior side. And then I have a bump here to the lateral gluteal tuberosity. Remember, we had that deltoid tuberosity and the humerus. And then there's a sharp process here at the back of the humerus that is called the linea aspera. The linea aspera is located here. Okay, so I'm going down this end. I got my condyles, which are my wheels. So the bump onto the side, that is going to be my epicondyle. This is lateral epicondyle. This is medial epicondyle. So wherever the head of the femur goes, that is medial side, right? And that's exactly what it is. Okay, I don't know if I explained to you the appendicular skeleton. There's a single bump here, aside from the medial epicondyle. So that bump is called the adductor tubercle. Muscles attached to that are called adductor muscles. Okay, so that's on the medial side, adductor tubercle. Okay. All right, so I'm going down into the tibia and fibula now. Before that, it actually goes to the upper part of the femur. This is the neck, head. The trochanters, not very obvious when you look at the anterior, but if you look at the posterior, you can actually see the trochanters more obvious. Okay, it's greater and lesser trochanters. And then on the lateral side, gluteal tuberosity. Okay, then we have your linea aspera at the bottom. Okay, now distal end. Remember, this is where the kneecap is located at, the patella. So this is going to be the flat surface, which is going to be the patellar surface. But remember, we actually chose this fossa to be our landmark for the posterior side. So I got my two wheels. They're called condyles, medial, lateral condyles. Okay, so how would I know if just given this part here? You should use the adductor tubercle as a landmark to become the medial side. Adductor tubercle is seen here, not here. Okay, so the adductor tubercle is here. So this is going to be my medial side. Medial epicondyle, medial condyle. Lateral condyle, lateral epicondyle. Okay, all right. So the patella. Okay, so we're not going to take care of the patella until we go to the joint. Okay, so now I'm at my tibia and fibula. Okay, same as the radius and ulna on the forearm. This is the leg. So I got my tibia, and the bump here in the front is called the tibial tuberosity. That's palpable on your shin bone, called the tibia. Then this is the head of the fibula. Okay, so I'm going to go down. Excuse me. Nothing much you can see at the mid portion, tibia and fibula. But the one that's obvious is going to be at the distal end. So this part here is going to be called the malleolus. Okay, the part here is going to be the malleolus. The smaller one is going to be the fibula. That's the lateral malleolus because the fibula is on the lateral side. Okay, remember that the radius ulna. If you look at the terminal end, the widest part on the lateral side is actually the radial bone. Okay, so that's the reason why you can say who's the styloid process of which bone. Here, the fibula is going to be the narrower one. Okay, so that's going to be the lateral side. So he owns the lateral malleolus, the fibula. The tibia is a wider one. So he owns the medial malleolus on the tibia. Okay. Then from there, you just see the tibial tuberosity here. Okay. And this is our articular surface for the part of the condyle of the femur. Okay. That's where they articulate to produce what we call the knee joint. Okay. And so this is going to be the picture here. Okay. So remember, this is not going to be a styloid process. It's too big. It's a malleolus. Okay, so you can actually see that the fibula is the narrower one. If I see the fibula, it's going to be lateral. So this is lateral malleolus, and the wider part, okay, it's going to be the medial malleolus. Again, you cannot make the mistake in saying this is going to be radius and ulna. Okay, because these are so big compared to the styloid process of radius and ulna. So you don't call it malleolus. Okay? All right, moving on. Now we're now at the foot. Okay? So the first bone called the talus, that's the tarsal bone. That's the one that carries the tibia. That is called the ankle bone. That's the one that carries the tibia. The heel bone is this one called the calcaneus. Okay? And then the single bone in the middle, it looks like a belly button. A belly button is called navicular. So we're going to call that bone navicular, single bone here. And then we got 3 cuneiforms. And just position, the one on the big toe is going to be the medial side. So I'm going to call it medial cuneiform. The one here is going to be the intermediate cuneiform. And this is going to be my lateral cuneiforms. 3 cuneiforms at the distal part of the tarsals. And the last is the cuboid. Looks like a cube, right? So those are my tarsal bones. The next one is my metatarsal, okay? And my phalanges. Only 2 for the big toe, and the rest is 3. Distal, middle, and proximal, okay? Again, we're looking at the bottom of the foot, okay? So we're good on this superior part only, okay? Right? Lateral view, okay? That's going to be the talus, the calcaneus, navicular, and the cuneiforms. So the more obvious cuneiforms are the intermediate and lateral. The medial, I can see it right here, a little bit, some of it. And this is your cuboid. Okay? And then after that, it actually gives you the different individual bones for the different parts. Okay? All right. Okay. So we're good. And I think we're good for tomorrow, right? And concentrate on those pre-tests. Every question in there is actually one of your pre-tests. So don't take it for granted about your pre-tests. So always study that because that's actually the thing I try to help you on. You got a pre-test that you can actually use in order to study. Okay. So don't just memorize the answers. Understand why the answer is that. Okay. So that's actually why the pre-test there. All right. So any question?
Professor,
Yes.
I have a question. For when you mean that we're gonna have like 100 questions or like plus the like within the test.
So
You know how we've been doing the pretest and some of the questions on the pretest has like certain things to name. That's what you mean. Each question counts as one, so each one will be 40 seconds.
each question is going to be 40 seconds. But remember, we're not having 100 questions on the exam. For the lecture exam, we're probably going to have 45 or 50 questions. even if you have 300 questions, one pretest. Okay, so I'm just actually asking you 50 or even 55 questions. That's all for the lecture. And then
Correct, but you know how you label like one of at least one question, like let's say question number one has like a lot of like labeling. So that counts as one question. Is that what you're saying? That it counts as like they would have each question would have one?
each of the labeling, even though it's in one picture, and I ask you 4 labelings on that one picture,
Right.
each of those labeling question that I asked you, it's 40 seconds.
Oh, okay then. So practically it's more than a minute on the question.
It's more than a minute, okay? But sometimes you're gonna have just one bone, and then I'm gonna ask you, identify this bone, and you're gonna type it in. What is that bone? Okay? So that is one question, and that's 40 seconds for that question.
And 40 seconds is the max you can give us.
Well, that's actually, like, for example, if remember the problem with actually giving you more time, but that actually the standard time. I mean, I've given that test for different schools already, and from the online thing that we did. Okay, 40 seconds is really a lot, because when you see that, there's no way for you to actually ask, I don't remember that bone. Okay, so with that bone, you should be able to say, yeah, that's going to be the linea aspera. Okay, because if I give you 2 minutes on each bone, you're gonna just print out the pretest and just take a look. Okay, what's in the
Yeah.
bone? It defeats the purpose. That's one of the reasons why. Remember, when you study, don't just memorize the information. Okay, try to actually understand why is this the name. What is the name of the bone? Why is it called the supraspinatus? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
you don't just memorize that supraspinatus. The reason why they name it the supraspinatus because it's above the spine. Okay, so if you actually just put supraspine on the answer, then I'll consider it. Okay, and that's the reason the exam,
Okay.
when we do the exam, sometimes it'll actually give you a 0 on the exam because it's waiting for me to go in and check manually. Okay, because I need to check the spelling. Sometimes the question is asking for a correct spelling and you misspelled it. The computer would not check it, and at the end of the exam, you're gonna actually get like zeros. Okay, that doesn't mean
So
that you had a 0.
misspelling, you would give us credit.
Yeah, that's the
Okay.
reason why I said supraspinatus. If you put it supraspine, that's fine. Okay. So the only thing I don't like is misspelling of rib.
Okay. I just because it helps a lot when we
Can
go
you
over
can you
back for
misspell a
your lecture.
what's that?
When we go back on your lecture, since you record them, it helps a lot. Going back since we're just here and then taking notes and then going back again, it helps a lot. So it's just kind of hard to study. I know it's a fast class. It's
I
a
know.
6 weeks class,
Mhm.
and it is a lot. I understand that it's a lot of information. So it just like we hardly have time to like do the labs and studying personally, and I
But
mean,
but remember, all the questions are in your pretest and your lab.
okay.
So if I actually go one by one the question, it's in your lab or in your pretest, and you can actually say, I just took the question out of the sky. No, it's there. Okay. So the point about that is this. Okay. So if you take a look at the pretest, you only are given 4 choices, right? On the pretest, given only 4 things to choose from. Okay. But the answer is the same because on the test, I might even ask you for 7 choices. But remember, the added 4, the added 3 that I add on the question was actually just something that is to actually not give you to actually a little bit change the question, but the answer is the same. Like for example, where do you see the linea aspera? Okay, so I'm going to ask you. Okay, I think this is one of the questions of the exam. Okay, what bone has the linea aspera? Number 1, radius. Number 2, A, radius. B, ulna. 3, C, that's going to be the scapula. 4, That's going to be your femur. Okay, so that was actually on your test. The answer is femur. Okay, so because you remember I said it's the sharp part at the back of the femur, the linea aspera. So that is the question in your three test. But when I give it on the exam, I'm going to say the same thing. Where's the linea aspera located at? It's going to be the A, radius, B, ulna, C, scapula, D, femur, E, it's going to be at the tibia, F is going to be at the fibula, then G is going to be at the clavicle. Okay, I just actually put some other choices, but the real answer is the same as what you have in the pretest. Okay.
Okay, Professor, thank you.
All right. So try your best because this is a fast-paced class, and I'm just wondering why you actually even enrolled in a summer class with anatomy. But I try to do my best because remember, if you take a look at the pretest, if you did your pretest, you can easily get 100% on those pretests, and that boosts your grade up. So I'm just asking you to help yourself with the exams, okay? Because right now, if I just depend on your pretest, I think you're getting 100% already. But if I actually add the exam there, like if you even just get 85% on the exam, I mean, I think you probably still on 100%, on the 90%. Why? Because the quizzes it actually helps bring up that grade. Okay, so I just want you to do best on your exams. Okay. All right. So good luck. There's a lot of exercises that you want to do. Okay, and you'll practice on, and then you got a couple of those pretests. Do it. Then it's a multiple entry. You come back and do it again, and that will help you out study. At least when you do the pretest, it's just like studying for the exam. Okay.
Professor,
Yes.
for the lab exercise, is multiple entries or only one time?
Only one time. That's the reason why I gave you the questions. Remember
Okay, thank you.
the documents there, the blank question. So if you're not ready to actually answer them, just get the question, research the answer. When you research the answer, it actually makes you understand and makes you study. Okay, I don't need you to do it right away the next day. Okay, I just want you to see it and understand. This could be similar questions that I have on the exam. And then when you research it, because remember, if I just give you the answer, you just actually you'll just totally answer the questions the way that you actually memorize it. But if you actually are given a question, then you research it, that's the way that the brain works. It makes you understand it and makes you actually get the answer and easy recall. Okay. So that's actually one of the important thing about exam is it going to be a recall or just the typically just memorization without even understanding? Okay, because you guys are going to the nursing program, am I right?
Yes.
Okay, what is the NCLEX exam? What is NCLEX?
Or is the state board exam?
Okay, all right. So do you know people who's in the nursing program already?
My sister-in-law just finished her nursing test.
Just finished. Did you take the
Yes.
exam? Did you take
Yeah,
the
she took it.
She passed already.
Okay,
Yes.
I
Okay.
took the LBN English.
Okay, and you passed the NCLEX, right?
Yes, first time.
Okay, so take a look at those questions. Okay, so if you actually go and take a look at the question of the RN program, okay, and also if you take a look at the passing, okay, so you're actually coming in at El Camino, am I right? Are you coming to the nursing program at El Camino? Oh, at Isale?
I don't know yet, but I took my vocational nursing at private college.
Okay, so but for the RN program, you actually wanted to move to the RN program, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so what school are you gonna go through?
Maybe ELAC or maybe somewhere else.
Okay, what's the reason why you chose ELAC?
Well, it's closer to home, and of course, it's cheaper.
It's cheaper, closer to home. Okay, let me actually just show you something so that you understand. Okay. Okay, are you seeing my? Wait a minute, what's wrong with this? Okay, so are you actually looking at my my Google search?
Yes.
Okay, so the passing rate on average of a person during the NCLEX exam is 88%. That means 100 people who took the exam, the 12 people didn't pass. Okay, so because they actually consider it as a passing rate. Okay, now I'm gonna click this. Okay, do you see this California Board of Nursing, registered nursing on your screen?
Yes.
Okay, and you said you want ELOC because it's close to you. Somebody said that, right?
Yes, it was.
Okay, let's see the passing rate of ELOC then. This is the reason why you decide on where to go. Okay, East Los Angeles, 74% passing rate.
Mm.
That means 25% didn't pass. Okay, so do you still like ELOC?
No.
No,
Well, no.
I teach ELOC. I teach Westlock. I teach at Moore Park. I teach at El Camino. Okay, so take a look at El Camino. What's the passing rate?
Well, 94.45.
Okay,
44.
so what does it mean when you have this passing rate in a school? What does it mean? That means the people who go to the school are taken care of. I'm not saying ELOC's not taking care of you, that you want to go to ELOC, but I just want to question this passing rate, okay? Because remember, I'm not discouraging you about ELOC, okay? I want you to be positive. The closer you might actually get the ELOC's passing rate better. But remember, if a school does, and this is the reason why they choose the best students in their admissions, because if the school will have less than 75%, 3 consecutive NCLEX exam, they actually fell below 75% of the passing rate of their students. Guess what? On the fourth exam, they're going to be given a warning. Warning means show cause. What does show cause mean? It will actually tell you that, tell me the reason why I should not close your school. That's called show cause, okay? Now, that is the reason why the school chooses the best of the best, okay? And that's one of the reasons why you got to actually be better, and because they'll actually choose somebody who's really good so that they'll improve their passing rate, okay? And the reason why I know this, because I used to be the medical director of Kaplan College, okay? So we actually look at our passing RN exam and our passing LVN exam. So if the passing rate goes down, the people on top is going to be screaming at me and say, why are these students not passing? Okay, because remember, the third and then the fourth one, if the fourth one happens to be less than 75%, guess what? BRN will say, close your school. We invested millions of dollars to open up that school. And then they're going to come out and say, close the school. Okay, so I'd rather I get good people to come in, and then actually just get a few people that is aspiring, because I don't want to get lower than 75%, okay, of the passing. That's actually how it is. The school in USC nursing program, okay, have you heard about the USC nursing program?
No,
You know why? They were
no.
because they were closed.
Mm.
They lost the nursing program. Okay, their passing rate was 65, 50,
Oh,
72. So consecutive. So BRN went back and say, you know what? Close your school. Okay, so they're actually just making out the stuff that they just want to take your money, so they don't want that. So that's the reason why you get fined. Okay, as you want ELAC. Okay, so
thank you.
okay, so look for that if you want. Okay, you might be the best one that will bring it up to 90%. Take a look at West Lock. Okay, one of my schools is West Lock. Let's see, West LA. Where's W, right? I don't see West LA here. Okay, but let's see my Moore Park. Okay, I've been teaching there for a long time. 95%. We're always on the 90s. It used to be 100 on Moore Park. Okay, because remember we literally teach students to actually understand anatomy, physiology, microbiology, because that's going to be their thing when they pass. Okay, now I don't understand this. Mount St. Mary's University, it's a $70,000 tuition, okay, for the associates, the nursing, $75,000, and that's your passing rate. Okay, uh, it's below 75. The third, if they actually get it below, they're gonna be given a letter show cause. Tell me what is the reason why you will actually we will not close you. Okay, and that's the time that Mount St. Mary's is gonna fire every instructor and get newer ones. Okay, because they don't want to lose that. It's millions of dollars was invested for the nursing program. Okay, and what's the West Coast University is passing? West Coast. Oh, this is BSN, Bachelor of Science. Okay, so I'm not actually discouraging you. Okay, I'm actually teaching you how to be strategic and how to actually try to actually choose for the school or to your thing. Okay, because remember, LVN is not similar. The exams are not similar to the RN exam. Okay, it's not similar. They actually have more cases compared to the LVN exam. Okay, so any question that you want to ask me?
No, thank you so much for your advice.
Yeah. So I want you to do well. Good. Okay. So choose one of the best schools that has a higher passing rate, and then that means that they're trying to give you tutorials, they're trying to get your help. They hire consultants for you to actually study and do the NCLEX exam. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay. All right. So guys, you got the anatomy. Pretest is there. Okay. And I'll see you tomorrow then. Okay. So I'm gonna put the recording. I'm gonna compress it so it's not boring. Okay.
So, Professor, we still have lecture tomorrow?
No, just exam. That's all.
Okay, because you said see you tomorrow, so I was just confused.
Oh no. Even I'm not in the exam. I'm monitoring the exam. Okay. So don't go to Zoom. Okay. Don't go to Zoom because remember, if you go to other website, it's gonna warn me that this person actually went to another browser. Okay, that's the reason why I monitor the exam, but I'm not in Zoom. So if you have a question like after the exam, just email me because I'm monitoring that exam and I'll see your email. Okay, but don't stop. Continue on for the next lab for the lab exam. Okay. All right. Have a nice night and try to study well. Thank you.
Thank you.